Well, welcome back to Loaded Landscapes. My name's Simon Plant, and today I'm going to show you a very quick tip to why it might be beneficial to blur your images not once, but twice. Well, welcome back. You may be one of those people who quite likes to add blurring to your pictures. You know, the sort of that 5:4 tilt and shift look, and you can do that in Photoshop, but sometimes that filter looks exactly that, like you've done it in Photoshop. I'm going to show you a little technique to apply a filter twice to make it look a little bit more subtle and less photoshopped. So this is quite a quick technique, and it's a technique I've used just recently on a job where I had to apply an effect, shall we say, to a set of images. And when you start adding some of these blurring effects that you've got available within Photoshop, they can look a little bit too photoshopped. So I did a technique where I made the images blur, but in a way that they didn't look like I just stuck a filter on them. And this is what we're going to do today. So I've got my background landscape image here, and I'm going to press Command or Control J to duplicate it. I'm then going to right click on that layer, and I'm going to create a smart object. And obviously you're probably familiar with smart objects. It means that we can apply a filter to this layer, and if we don't like it, we can go back in and readjust it. So it's very, very flexible. I'm going to go to Filter and go to the Blur Gallery, which gives us lots of different options for blurring. And the two we're going to use today is the Tilt Shift and the Field Blur. I'm going to use the Tilt Shift to begin with. Now, the Tilt Shift gives you an effect that you would be able to get from using a 5:4 or 10:8 plate camera. You know, those big old cameras where you could control the lens position and control the perspective with the back plate where the film goes in of this camera. And by using these, you can enable you to get much sharper images or drop the focus from certain parts of the image. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to emulate this effect with this tilt shift filter. Now we've got the filter already laid out on our image. So with this image, I want to apply some blurring to the image, but keep the sign nice and sharp. And we can do that by rotating this gradient, should we call it, and this controls what part of the image stays sharp and what drops off. So the center here is going to be the sharp part of the image, and these control how quickly the sharpness drops off. So if you've got this transition set right here, the difference between the focus in sharp part of the image and the outer focus part of the image will happen very, very quickly. So you get more of a quick transition, which is really what you don't want. You want to make this look very subtle. So by dragging these sliders out, you get a nicer transition between the blur and the sharp parts of the image. So we'll do that here, and this controls, obviously these two control how much sharpness or what parts of the image remain sharp. So as I said, I want the actual side of this image to stay nice and sharp, but everything else to start to blur out quite naturally. So somewhere around there looks pretty good. We can then control how much blur to give this. So if we bring this up, you can start to see everything drops off very, very quickly. You can see it's very unnatural. So we don't want to go too far. So I reckon perhaps around 24 pixels looks pretty good. So the next thing we can do is the distortion. This changes the effect of the blurring, and it's worth having a little play around. If we look at the fence here, the way the distortion alters that, and you can get some quite nice effects. Somewhere around there looks pretty good on this image. And that's simply really the filter done and dusted. So we'll click OK, and that should apply this filter to our image and open back up in our layers. So our image is now open again in Photoshop, and you can see the smart filter. There's it turned off, and there is when it comes on. turn back on again, and it's just rendering that out. So let's have a look at what we've got. We've got our sign here nice and sharp, and then gradually, obviously through here is our plane of sharp focus, and then it tailors off blurred both down here and up towards the top. Now that's all fine, but what annoys me sometimes, it looks a little bit too fake, and I don't like sometimes the way the transition appears in some areas, like behind the rocks here, and maybe in this part, and I'd like a little bit more control. I'm not looking to emulate a plate camera, the way it alters perspective and the focus. Exactly. I'm just looking for a nice, pleasing effect to the eye. So what we can do is apply another blurring filter. So we've still got our smart, our layers of smart objects. So we can go to Filter, Blur Gallery, and this time I'm going to go to Field Blur. And this is slightly different. This actually lays down control pins, should we call them. And you as soon as you open it up, you get a control pin already laid down for you. And you can move these around as you wish. The first one, it's already applying some blurring to the overall image, which defeats what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep the sign sharp, but everything else blurring. So we'll lay that one right on top of our sign. Okay. And then we can alter the blurring of that, and I want to drop this to 0 because I want that particular area of the image to blur. So now we're back to kind of square one where we applied the last filter as is. So we've not changed anything now, but we can lay down more control points. And so as we look at the image, I don't really want this part of the image to be sharp or here. So as we lay down more points, we can start to add blurring. So we can alter again how much focus or blurring we will want in certain areas. And I want this to be subtle. I want it to sort of tailor off quite nicely. So I think for this part of the image, around 20 pixel works quite well. And that's add the effect of blurring this area as well. Again, behind here, these rocks, I want to make sure that we've got some blurring going on there. Again, maybe around 17 pixels, and we can obviously, the further we bring this in, it starts to encroach on our sharp pinpoint here, a control point. And it's just a matter of moving them around and changing the blurring effect to fill in, to give us a better transition. We've got another one here. You can see if I zoom in a little bit, we've still got a bit of a funny area of focus here, which I don't want. So I'm going to lay down another pin, and again, alter the blurring. Now you want to try and keep the continuity there. You don't want an area really blurred and then the area next to it a lot sharper. You want to try and recreate a natural fall off in focus. So just bear that in mind and keep an eye on the numbers you're using. So this one I used 17. I believe this one was 17 as well. Oh, this one was 20. So would that one be 20 as well if this one's 17? I don't know. You've got to look at it, look at the image and try and sort of work out what works. I'm going to drop that down a bit. Having said that, this one I can maybe even turn up a little bit if I wanted to. Depends, like I said, on the effect of the overall image that you're getting. I think that works okay. So this one, again, maybe no more than about 17 pixels will work best. And we've got a little bit here as well up by the rock here. I'm just going to drop that down. That can go up because it's in the distance. Just go up to around 20 pixels as well. It's not an exact science here. We've just got to keep an eye on the image and just work out what works well and what doesn't. Now that's encroaching on my sign and I don't want that, so I'm just going to drag that up a little bit out here and maybe turn it down a little bit. Okay, that doesn't look too bad. Somewhere around there. So it's still encroaching a little bit on my sign, so I'm going to create another pin in the corner here, and again I'm going to drop that right down to 0. Okay, so those are the pins laid out. If there's any areas I want to blur even more, I can lay another pin down and say I want to blur this foreground a little bit more. I can do that. So there's plenty of control by using these control points. as so. Now you can also there's other things here, like you can change the light bokeh, so if you want to allow a little bit more light coming through, like so, as long as it doesn't clip, and that gives it again, just adds to a bit more natural effect. So I'll bring that up a little bit. And you can change the transition, how many tones are involved in that light bokeh by using this light range. And I'm going to have this set up quite high on this one. I think you can see in the sky here, as I move this light range, the effect it has on the image. So that's sometimes worth having a lot to play around with. And there's also other settings for the color, etc. You can also, at this point, because we're blurring the image, naturally you want to put a little bit of grain back in. Now you can do that here. I don't use this slider. I wait until the end and add the grain on a separate layer. So I'm not going to use that, but you can add some grain here. So I'm still not 100% happy with a couple of these control points. So I can just click on those and readjust them a little bit. Like so, and bring that one maybe across a little bit. And then once you've done all that, you can click OK, and again open that up into Photoshop and have a better look at what we've got on the screen. So let me just zoom in a little bit, like so. I'm going to turn our field blur off to reveal just our tilt shift. So this is the first filter that we added, the tilt shift filter, a bit of a mouthful. And you can see we had our plane of sharp focus running diagonally here through the image, so our sign is nice and sharp, but also some of these other areas which I didn't particularly want sharp there. Then the transition here looks a little bit fake, so we went in then and added our field blur, which I'll turn back on, and that just filled in some of these gaps. Now there's still a little bit of an issue here I don't like, so we can simply double click in here and go back in and readjust these. So maybe we need to add another control point here, drop the blurring down maybe to about 5 pixels and just move that a little bit. So it's a bit trial and error, and if it doesn't look natural, then you can go back in and just constantly readjust these as you see fit. There's a little bit of a sharp area here I'm not too keen on, but you get the idea. So you can come back in if you want to drop these down. You can do that by sliding these around or using the control slider up here as you see fit, as I said. So that's just one way that maybe you can just smooth out some of the filtering effects in the blur gallery there. It's a technique that I said I've used a couple of times, and you may not like, you may like that kind of more of a sharper transition, but I think there's a call sometimes to blur the image twice just to create a more subtle effect, a less photoshopped effect. So the final thing I would do on here, as I said, rather than adding the noise in the filter itself, I prefer to do it after the fact. So I would go up here, add a new layer. Okay, I'm going to call this one noise. Change the mode to overlay or soft light. Let's go to soft light, and it's important to tick this box, fill soft light neutral color 50%. That's just going to purely and simply add grey to a layer. Going to right click, also convert this to a smart object, and then we can go to filter, noise, add noise. We want Gaussian noise, and we just want to add a little bit of noise to the image, and the settings will be different depending on the size of the image, but you can always come back in. I'm going to add an amount of 3, which is probably too much. Let's zoom in. There's before, there's after, so probably a bit too much noise on there. So I'm going to drop that down somewhat, maybe to 2. And that just helps kind of, again, add a little bit of texture back in. With the blurring, obviously it's going to blur out the texture. The noise will help bind the image together and add a little bit more texture back in. Again, giving it a little bit more of a realistic effect. So this isn't perfect, it needs a bit more work, but I think that gives you a good overview of why you may want to blur your image twice as opposed to just once for a better, more subtle effect. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to catch you on the next one. Cheers for watching.